Hello, everyone. Welcome to the FTX podcast. Really honored to have here with me today Nishad Singh, finally, our head of engineering at FTX. Welcome.
Hey guys, yeah, thanks for having me, Tristan.
That's great to have you on, man. And to kick this off, would you mind introducing yourself and giving a bit of background to the listeners?
Yeah, I'm Nishad Singh. I spent 1.5 years as one of the core Alameda engineers, and now I'm the head of engineering at FTX, and I dabble in serum engineering every now and then.
Cool. So you have the quite varied approach there. And before we go into those things, I'd love to go back in time a little bit and hear kind of how you got into engineering in the first place and why that sparked your curiosity.
Yeah, it wasn't premeditated. I don't think I really knew until college that engineering was even really a plausible fit for me. I mostly lucked into it with the friends I got situated around in college being into it, and that being pretty contagious and infectious, their enthusiasm. And then it turned out that computer science was like sort of an academic fit in a way that things really hadn't been before. Like I didn't really define myself academically at all, and it just really clicked. The field's also super exciting. The classes were well run. I mean, for context, if you think about some other like mathematically oriented fields like physics and stuff, I think it's easy to argue that they're not being invented and grown and developed as quickly and as transparently as something as computer science is. Like computer science is pretty obviously shaping the world in ways that are sort of like intellectually accessible to somebody that's new to it. And I think it is actually developing as a field really quickly. And there's a lot of ways to gain traction at different levels of skill. So it's like a pretty satisfying and like really invigorating environment to be in. And so I caught the bug in college. And that was basically how I got into engineering. It was kind of a mistake. I mean, like I just as easily could have been true for economics or something. And basically almost was. I got lucky with some like initial classes that I liked a lot.
Well, I'm really glad you took that route because it's allowed everything that's going on right now in a large sense. Before we get into that, can we go a little bit into your professional life out of college? Because I know you got kind of the dream job at Facebook. I'd love to hear a little bit about that. And I also want to know about switching out of that, which must have been a really big thing for you.
Yeah, it was definitely the dream job for what I was going for at the time. You know, out of undergrad, I sort of got like an entry-level software engineering position at Facebook, but it was on a team that I really liked. It was like a reinforcement learning team. Reinforcement learning is sort of one variant of machine learning that I was kind of into, but more importantly, I had just like a really great boss, and it was just me and him starting on a fresh code base from scratch. So I sort of got a lot of the really fun parts of being in a startup, the ownership and like growth opportunity and stuff like that, but with like a lot of the other things that a large company like Facebook brings you. And so I really thought that I'd gotten super lucky with my setup there. And I think you're right that it was hard to sort of make the switch to Alameda just because it was hard to imagine a world or like a role I could have in the sort of like entry level big tech that was better suited to me than this was. But Alameda was pretty compelling.
And going back to then, I want to hear about your experience. So from my understanding, you went and visited Sam's startup. What was going on there? Where were they? How many people were there?
It was in an apartment at the time. It was quite early. I think I first visited Alameda when it was about like a month into its existence. And I think there might have been like 5 people in the apartment, but at that time it was really chaotic. It was unclear who was there part-time, who was there full-time. And really what was obvious was that the most important things they wanted to do were like really important and really fruitful. I sort of watched Sam like execute a sequence of trades. I knew nothing about trading at the time, but even then it was sort of understandable that sequence of trades was super profitable and easy to understand and that there were lots of them available. And so there was all this sort of operational flurry around getting Alameda into a state where it could really take advantage of these trades. It was really fun. It was really chaotic. And it was clear that it could possibly be onto something pretty big.
And I imagine there was more to it than that, though, for you to decide to switch, right? Because I believe you have other incentives. Would you mind breaking that down a little bit?
Yeah, is my interest in effective altruism. EA, effective altruism, is this idea that you can do a lot of good for the world if you're careful about choosing how you do so, and that it's worthwhile spending your time thinking about what the most effective ways to do good are, and that the most effective ways are sort of significantly better than what would happen if you sort of went about it haphazardly. It's a really big, hard, lofty goal to improve the world a lot, but lots of smart people have thought about this and made a lot of headway, and I found really sort of straightforward, exploitable sort of opportunities. And then, of course, there's sort of other ones that are riskier and more uncertain, but for which the upside is possibly huge. As an example of something that's sort of obviously a really good use of time, money, etc., is getting like malaria bed nets. For something like $9,000 or $10,000, you can, in practice, save like a life's worth of happiness or something. They're definitely getting fuzzy with the definitions here, but something to that effect, and that's super encouraging. Most people that are sort of fortunate enough, have like the Bay Area tech sort of upbringing that I had are capable of, effectuating that kind of change on a pretty regular basis. And so you can have a huge impact if you just did that. But in some sense, that's kind of like the lower bound of how much good you can do. And there are a lot of other really exciting, really high upside things that you can take part in and support that can really dramatically affect the future and like the long-term future too. Many people get excited about global warming and like sort of understand like viscerally that if humanity doesn't take care of that pretty soon, it could have dire consequences, and it's probably worth the investment to take it seriously. And there are a lot of things that are kind of like global warming that are that are more neglected, but possibly similarly tractable, and also sort of have huge impact on humanity's existence and happiness for countless years to come. And so that space of things, I think, strikes me as like a real reason to to live and like to sort of orient my life around if possible. Alameda and FTX let me contribute to it by earning money and giving it to sort of opportunities that are really promising in that space.
And then how do you balance, like, because I understand you a little bit from having hung out and spoken and whatnot, and how do you balance that urge to go and participate in these things that you think will change the world versus being able to contribute in the Earning Through Give program? Is there any conflict there, or do you think that what you're doing is more effective for both senses?
Oh, there's a huge conflict. And to be clear, I'm not sure that I'm doing the right thing. I mean, it's very unlikely I'm doing the right thing. It would be kind of a crazy coincidence if the thing I happened to choose was also the most effective thing I could be doing. I think it's a pretty good thing, but it's only a pretty good thing because of the scale of how well Alameda and FTX are doing. I think, for instance, my plan to do it from Facebook was not a good decision. And I sort of obviously should have been working directly at like a charity or at, something working on like AI safety or something instead. This is a large part of the reason I instead went to go join Alameda, because if I was being honest with myself and thinking about the expected value of these two routes, they were sort of extremely different. And at times there have been like specific jobs that are in the charity space, in like the philanthropic space that I've like really strongly considered. And I think in my future, those are totally plausible I end up doing something like that instead. Right now, I think Alameda and FTX happen to be really great opportunities. And selfishly, they're also really great fits for me. So I hope I can sort of stay honest and when an obviously good thing comes up, if I sort of, if I do a good job keeping my head up and looking around, that's more effective, that I sort of have the courage to make the jump and sort of do the right thing from a make the world better perspective. And currently, I'm sort of lucky that I can be fulfilled in many ways at this job, one of which is doing something that's probably pretty good from an effective altruist perspective, but also just like suits my strength and is really satisfying to work on otherwise.
And going back a little bit, because when you as you said, Alameda was just starting when you went and visited the first time and you kind of caught the bug. How did you weigh out this, now it's proven itself. It showed that it really achieved and is achieving the potential it was setting out to do. But at that time, how did you consider the odds of it getting there? And why did you think it had the chance of doing so?
Yeah, it's a really good question. It was hard. And it wasn't really obvious until I was sort of careful about the math and thinking about the upside scenarios. A big part of what convinced me was talking with Sam about what those upside scenarios look like. Crypto trading was better than any trading environment that he'd ever seen. You guys might remember this, listeners, but in late 2017, which is when this was, there were 50% arbitrages between Korea and the United States. There were 10% arbitrages between Japan and the United States. And this is on, relatively liquid coins, Bitcoin, and for a humongous size. And it turns out that those arbitrages weren't getting closed for a reason, like banking setups made it difficult to do so. But there was nothing fundamentally preventing them from getting closed once those operational sort of like obstacles were removed. And that was something of a proof for how much money can be made. That you just on one example in the sea of possibilities in crypto trading, that alone justifies a crazy amount of effort because it alone sort of offers a crazy amount of profit. Just thinking about that one example was actually enough to motivate leaving Facebook, although I think the real vision was much sort of grander than that. And it wasn't certain, but it was sort of clear that like crypto trading might be really great. It might die, but it might be really great. It might stay in an environment like the late 2017 one. It might be the case that we can compete. This is something that I was actually most uncertain about, our ability to compete with the likes of other like serious trading firms at the time when we were just starting up. And that, you sort of add all, you sort of multiply all these small probability events with what the upside scenario looks like when you do well, and you still get a really big number, even if those probabilities are small. And I think being really concrete about that process it did convince me. And it was scary because more likely than not it was going to fail. And that was not the sort of decision I was used to making, but super glad I did. And we got, through will and effort and luck, we ended up in one of the scenarios that was pretty good. Definitely not as high as our hopes were, but above expectations.
So that sounds really good from the rationalistic, reasonable perspective. But I want to ask you a little bit more on a human level, because I know personally the reason I wanted to work at FTX was because I watched these videos of Sam and I saw, wow, okay, this is a person I want to work with, and I knew it, and it struck me as a certainty. Was it the people as well, or was it just you weighing out these odds?
The odds were actually the biggest part of it, but I think you're totally right that the people didn't hurt at all. It was pretty clear that everybody working there was highly motivated, was sort of effective altruism aligned, which mattered a lot to me, and was really bright, really on it, and that I could learn a lot from them. And I definitely had had this like unlived fantasy at the time of joining a startup and really giving it my all. And this one happened to check a ton of boxes and just afforded like one of the things that I think I was really looking for in a startup environment was big upside with a team I really respected. And this definitely had both of those.
Got it. And when you started, how was that first transition phase? I'm guessing it wasn't that you just one day to another left Facebook. Did you test the waters a little bit? How did that go?
Yeah. So I spent, let's see, maybe about a month doing weekends and nights at Alameda. So I'd like, have my day job in sort of South Bay, in California, and then I drive up to Berkeley and go work in the apartment or whatever. And at some point it became obvious that it was like kind of stupid that I was even bothering with the day job. And so I like took some time off and really gave my 100% to working at Alameda. And then it was obvious even earlier than this, but it took me some time to sort of really arrive at it myself. Eventually decided to make the switch. But it was about a month of like toying with and actively working on Alameda before I formally made the switch.
And I'd love to hear a little bit about your experience and your growth as an engineer during this time as Alameda, because I imagine it must be a very I know it's a very self-starter culture. So I'd like to know how you navigated that.
Yeah, you're right. It was really self-starter oriented. Like it did take, one thing that was nice about joining Alameda early is that there wasn't much of a code base. And so there was something of like, I could sort of invent whatever I wanted. But at the same time, I didn't really have the ability at that time to do invention really well. Gary, our CTO, is sort of brilliant beyond belief and was like a really good mentor. And I think being forced to push things out on really sort of short timescales and design thoughtfully was a really good forcing function for me to level up. I think in the beginning, it was challenging. I'd see like a list of things that we wanted to get done. I'd have some idea about how to do each of them, but for every single one, there was something in the way. And I think, the process looked something like find a task that people want done, think about what I know about how to do it, bug Sam and Gary, hopefully for not too long on the things that are sort of blocking me on it, and then just try to chip away at it. And pretty soon, I definitely wasn't like the expert in how to build stuff, but I was comfortable enough in our systems that I could really meaningfully contribute and really consistently do so. And then you sort of get, a lot of like exponential growth and develop a lot of competency within the context of like a code base and organization. It was fortunate that like Sam and Gary were there to give a lot of really great, really quick advice, and also that the code base was up to us to develop, and I didn't sort of have to learn a billion whatever company specific conventions. Like that was for us to make up.
Mm-hmm. I can also imagine 20 hours a day every day probably helped as well to that.
Yeah, the 15 to 20 hours a day didn't hurt. That definitely helps you improve quickly.
Yeah, so this is like the leveling ground for everything that came after, I see. This is really brilliant.
Yeah, like the first 6 months were sort of absurd. Like, almost every sleeping hour was in the office, let alone waking ones. It wasn't like we were forced to do it. It was that we were all like really motivated by this and really excited by it. And that was like a really fun, and yeah, as you mentioned, like high growth sort of like period for me and for probably a lot of people.
And before we go into FTX and how that came to be, I'd like to hear a little bit about, Alameda's transition, because I can imagine, 2017 markets were inefficient as can be, but then the bear market happened. What was Alameda's thought process through this?
The bear market was a hard thing to sort of swallow. Before the bear market, dumb trades were everywhere. And by dumb, I mean like obviously incredibly good trades were everywhere. And so we had this sort of hilarious phenomenon where so long as we really just focus on getting the good trades done correctly, it was the right decision to not worry too much about our mistakes. Like patching up our mistakes wasn't worth the effort when we could just sort of throw everything at getting the good trades done perfectly or done as well as we could. Of course, that might not have been true. This is just sort of our perspective at the time. And I haven't done like a really thorough retrospective on it. It became more clear that sort of perspective was not going to be like a successful one in the bear market. In the bear market, a lot of the obviously good trades dried up. And so we had to really tighten up our operation around everything else. One really funny example of this is like in the bull market in late 2017, we did have bots that were trading, but these bots took like 20 seconds to cycle. They'd like, look at an order book and send orders on a couple exchanges. It did this all in serial, and it was like atrocious for many reasons. And it's sort of hard not to be atrocious for many reasons if it takes you 20 seconds to do something like that. Redesigned a lot of our systems from the ground up and sort of built the foundation of sort of Alameda's engineering in the bear market, because we were forced to. We could no longer get away with 20-second bot cycles. We had to make many, many more types of trades. We became like a real market making shop around that point. And that was a pretty fundamental change from a shop that really should have only been focusing on a couple of discrete trades.
Yeah, so forged by fire in some sense. It's really interesting you say that, because my sense of the founders of the most successful crypto companies I've interviewed, such as Stanny from Aave and whatnot, is the same thing, that during the bear market, all they did was put their heads down and build. And then when things started picking up again, there was a very robust infrastructure ready to take it on.
Yeah, and it's not like the bull market was, a dead period or something. Like our volume was increasing over it. And, at points we were doing quite well. And like we were still developing really quickly. I don't think we knew for certain we were going to get out of a bear market. And we still thought it was probably worth it for us to be doing this. But I think you're right that like stuff really caught fire when we sort of exited those few months of early 2017. Mid to late 2018 was significantly better than early 2018.
Oh, really? Interesting.
Yeah.
You guys were improving rapidly then.
Yeah, and I think the market also picked up a bit. As a single example that I remember, futures volumes in mid 2018 were kind of crazy, like OKX, AOS expirations, if I remember correctly, were like a really big market event. And that sort of thing flows through to a lot of crypto and a lot of crypto trading. Early 2018 was, March 2018-ish was much, much drier.
That makes sense. And then let's move on a little bit into the FTX side of things. I'd love to hear how that came to be, where the idea came from, and how that played out.
Business-wise, it was something that we've been thinking about for a very long time. We were thinking about building an exchange for about a year before we did. And the reason was somewhat straightforward. It was that the opportunity was huge. It was something we hadn't done before, but it was clear that exchanges made a lot of money in this space. They made a lot of money almost exactly because they take on a lot of responsibilities. Like in the traditional finance world, exchanges don't do that much. They provide matching and they provide a lot of technology. In crypto, they do custody. They also provide matching. They provide you leverage and margin. They handle things like liquidations. They tend to be the groups that develop financial products. They provide UIs for users. There's a whole slew of things that exchanges in crypto do. And so there's a lot of opportunity to make good choices. And conversely, a lot of opportunity for a lot of reasons why competitors, a lot of areas that competitors were not making good choices in. And so I think for a year, we were obviously exchanges can be doing a lot better than they're doing. There's huge room for improvement here, but we were kind of afraid to do it ourselves because of unknown unknowns. And I think we just sort of took the math on the upside seriously and the likelihood that we'd get there seriously finally a year after we should have. We're like, okay, we should do this. Gary and Sam basically took off to Hong Kong, Gary being our CTO, and built the exchange in a couple of months, the first version of it. In that period, there's another level up moment for me. I basically took over Alameda engineering and was managing the engineering team and sort of leading all engineering related efforts back at home base in Berkeley. When the FTX MVP was sort of done, and when one guy under me, Nate, was really great, was sort of ready to take the reins at Alameda, we did a little swap where I went to go work. I sort of stopped working at Alameda and haven't that much since at all, and went to go work full time in FTX, and Nate took over for Alameda.
Did you fly to Hong Kong as well then?
Yeah, I think I flew. I forget exactly when. It might not have been exactly at the same time that I started working at FTX, but soon after.
My understanding is one of the big reasons or frustrations you guys had that drove you to make an exchange as well to resolve this were clawbacks that you were seeing in other exchanges. Would you mind kind of explaining what those are and how FTX deals with those differently?
Yeah, absolutely. Crypto exchanges have to deal with margin and providing users with leverage. So what this means is that if a user wants to get really long something, more long Bitcoin than they have dollars to support buying that many literal Bitcoins with, they can instead tell an exchange, hey, I've got $100, I want to buy $1,000 of Bitcoin, will you let me? The exchange can say yes, but probably what should happen is that if Bitcoin goes down, the exchange reclaims those funds before $100 of profit is lost. This is sort of the fundamental motivation behind margin and leverage. Is it lets users express their beliefs more strongly than their capital base would otherwise allow, but at the risk of liquidation. And the exchange is responsible for liquidation. If the exchange doesn't liquidate users carefully enough or thoughtfully enough or quickly enough, they could lose more than the amount of collateral that the user put in. So in this case, if a user gets long $1,000 of Bitcoin and Bitcoin goes down enough that the user loses more than their initial deposit and profit, then somebody's eating this loss. One option is that the exchange eats this loss. Another option is that users eat this loss, which is an awkward decision, but it's one that many exchanges adopted. So when users eat that loss, users that made profit on the contract as opposed to lost profit, that's called a clawback. It's like a socialized loss mechanism. You distribute the losses among people who made money. And there's a ton of problems with this. But to really put in perspective, I think hundreds of millions of dollars were lost in clawbacks in 2018. Some really absurd numbers. And avoiding them is, first of all, I'm not so convinced that exchanges should even be designed around the concept of clawbacks. But even if you hold that constant, there are a ton of really obvious design decisions that you can make that change the likelihood of them. We were very familiar with margin-related logic and trading. And so we had strong opinions on how you could design a system that's better, that basically avoids clawbacks altogether. We tried pitching it to many places, thinking, wondering why there must be something we're missing that this isn't adopted. And it turned out there was basically no good reason, just generic, classic organizational incompetence stuff got in the way of adopting better solutions. And so this was one of many areas in which it was clear that if we built an exchange, we could do a better job. It wasn't clear we could build an exchange that was strictly superior to others, but it was one of many areas that we thought we could definitely make an improvement in. So we have, FTX has never suffered a clawback because our liquidation system is significantly more thoughtful. And things like this were big motivations in us actually deciding it was worthwhile. We needed a reason to think that we could become the best exchange, not just an okay exchange. And things like this helped inform that decision.
I mean, and it's one of FTX's large contributions to the space is that by improving these systems, it forced other exchanges to do the same, because if not, users just wouldn't stay there anymore. So.
Yeah, I mean, I would definitely like to think that was the sequence of events. I think certainly we've encouraged people to tighten up, like exchanges to sort of tighten up their liquidation logic and stuff. And the space has gotten better as a result. And a lot of people have copied FTX's model, which is good. But I don't want to overstate the connection. It's possible people were also, improving sort of simultaneously instead of sequentially. I'm not certain, but I'd like to think that we were a good influence.
It seems that FTX, I mean, at least from the timeline that I've been looking at, it seems like FTX is one of the first that came out with this. And then I'm not going to name names, but other exchanges copied similar things. And even now, if you look at, I look at sometimes these liquidation trackers across exchanges, and FTX is by far the exchange with the least amount of liquidations.
FTX's ratio of liquidations to volume is significantly lower than all other comparable competitors and top competitors. Yeah.
Orders of magnitude. It's pretty great. It's pretty great.
One or two orders of magnitude difference in the ratio there sometimes.
Yeah. Cool. It's okay. This goes into how you guys, the reasoning behind why you built this, how you put this together. It still doesn't really explain how you guys, a bunch of engineers, figured out this product facing thing. Where was was there an interplay with new characters that joined the team to take care of these other roles, or did you guys do that too?
No, absolutely. I mean, when we were running just Alameda, we were just a bunch of dorks in like basketball shorts and long socks, right? And like, I was like one of the least sort of like math oriented geeky people around. And that's like a really shocking statement. Yeah. I mean, had not dealt with many customer facing things. This was like not at all our expertise. And even from the start, when we thought about the prospects of FTX, like we were never uncertain about our ability to get the engineering right and to get the design right, sort of in a financial product sense. We were highly uncertain about our ability to actually get users. I think, we basically had initial forays into public facing things with Alameda's OTC system, getting a bunch of clients there. And we also had some sense of like what client facing work meant from how we were being treated at other exchanges. And so we thought like, look, it's plausible we can do a good job of this. We're not certain at all. We definitely have to beef up business development and customer support and operate and, like departments like that. And so we did. We like grew really, really rapidly once the first version of FTX was built and as it was getting built, and developed like we were very fortunate to develop a really strong and a really strong team that works on sort of non-technical things. There are sort of a ton of them,
Mm-hmm.
At this point, maybe the majority of important FTX work is non-technical. Yeah, I mean, the people we hired just happen to be really good fits and really enthusiastic and happen to have worked out pretty well.
Yeah, I think you guys have had a really good sense on that, on the hiring aspect. At least, I don't know if Alameda so much from stories, but from the FTX side, it's definitely seems to be a good adventure with the people we have on board, because everyone's really there. Like I've worked other jobs where people are there, but here, when you go to work, people are putting their heads down and they're, really putting their 100% in, and it tells.
Yeah, there's nothing that sapped energy like sitting around a team that doesn't care, and there's nothing that motivates like sitting around a team that really does. And so we've still got this like infectious motivation bug going around, and I really hope we can keep it as we grow.
Yeah, that's totally true. And I'd like to hear a little bit more about your shift in responsibilities and how you went from creating these trading infrastructure at Alameda to more of what you're started building at FTX and where your responsibilities shifted to.
So at Alameda, towards the end of my sort of stint there, I like hired many people and I was like personally managing them and was sort of building on an existing infrastructure, continuing a lot of the types of work that we knew we wanted to do already. And that posed a lot of challenges and I grew a lot, but it was pretty fundamentally different from FTX. In FTX, I've sort of shifted roles to being to managing less initially. I guess now sort of back to similar amounts. But really just going back to being a full-time individual contributor, like just actually raw coding 80% of my time. So that was one shift. But maybe the more dramatic shift actually was that the sort of type of engineering that both of these firms do is extremely different. Like at Alameda, often we'll see a trade that we want to get done, in like the next 2 hours, and we need a new technical setup to make it work. And if we make a mistake in that setup, so be it, that's a cost of business. The most important thing is to try. And so engineering wise, the sort of efforts there look like way more scrappy, way more sort of creative, and they accept bugs. It's like really, it's a sort of bug forgiving environment. Like well over half the things I wrote had some issue in them. The sort of hope was that those issues weren't going to be that big. And on net, they weren't. On net, it was a good decision to like move extremely quickly and sort of accept bugs as a cost of business. At FTX, that's like not at all the case. Correctness and being bug free are super important. the sort of style of engineering that you partake in is pretty different. It doesn't necessarily mean you have to sacrifice speed. It just means that like sort of mentally your approach around correctness and guarantees is pretty different between these firms. And so I think that was like one of the bigger changes. And to be clear, the Alameda version of engineering is like, I think, pretty unique. I'm not sure this exists in a ton of places. I'm sure it exists in crypto. I'm sure it exists in trading and like definitely the intersection of the two. But most engineering cares a lot about like correctness and cleanliness and performance and things like this that Alameda was less sensitive to at the time.
Makes a lot of sense. Wow, man, you've had some interesting experiences in the space. I know I have a lot of friends who are engineers, and it seems that in a lot of ways they kind of find a niche and that's exactly where they stay, and it's just straight on ahead until they're done or whatever and retire or their company gets bought out. But here you are just like going all over the place. I want to.
Yeah, it's a blast.
I have a question for you. So I know we've been rolling out a lot of upgrades and updates and stuff lately. I'd love to hear which of these you're happy about or proud about, or what your thought process is on these things.
Yeah, so some of the context here is that performance really matters for an exchange. There's a lot that goes into an exchange that matters. Performance is one of those things. And with crypto volumes ticking up a lot recently, making sure that FTX stays performed in really high volume periods is pretty crucial. So we've been focusing a lot of this lately. I think that there is a lot I'm proud of and a lot that I wish we'd done differently. In terms of what we've done differently, I sort of wish that we had tackled it earlier. And in terms of what I'm proud of, it's sort of that we have been able to be targeted enough and thoughtful enough in what we actually do roll out that it solves real solutions. One really big trap that you can fall into, maybe definitely in engineering and maybe in general, is that like it's really easy to sort of misdiagnose what a problem is and like overindulge like an impulse to like look into something and improve something in a system that isn't actually the bottleneck and isn't actually the problem. This is like super true in engineering, especially when business needs are, the people that think and care a lot about business needs are often separated from the people that think and care a lot about engineering. And so when like engineering related business decisions need to be made, there's like a lot of loss there. I'm pretty proud of how I think we have not incurred that loss. I think like the changes that we made have been sort of exactly the ones that have been most important to make. I mean, to our best guess, we try to like really focus on what the actual performance problems are that we're running into and solve them. And performance is like a really multi-dimensional thing. You can, just as off the top of my head, there's like stuff like preventing DDoS. There's stuff like improving latency when placing orders. There's stuff like improving global throughput when of orders during busy times. There's a bunch of other random persistent systems that might have idiosyncratic behavior when they're under high load, and you can think about sharding them thoughtfully. There's all sorts of places that you can basically parallelize what was initially written as serial code to get performance improvements. These all have interplays. So I think I'm proud of how we've been able to sort of continually improve and be and sort of like see that there's a lot of runway ahead and continual space to improve. As an example of how far we've come, recently we had a $6.5 billion trading day. This was our highest trading day. And FTX had some issues, but like no serious downtime. Many other exchanges had serious downtime. Many of the exchanges had some issues. A couple performed super well and had no issues. Had we sort of put our infrastructure 2 months ago through the same test, it would have been a disaster. Not that we couldn't have fixed things and made it okay sort of short term, but that like infrastructurally, we were not nearly as robust. We've definitely been making improvements. The sense in which I wish we'd done something different is that I wish it wasn't catch up. I wish that we'd been more proactive about this. Sometimes it's hard to predict exactly where things will fail until they do. I think now we sort of have a clear sense of how to improve without playing catch up, which is nice.
Yeah, it was also hard to predict how fast everything was going to grow too. So I think that may have weighed into your guys' mental models. Do you say that's right?
That's definitely true. I think, yeah, even if we knew how fast it was going to improve, I think performance is just a pretty hard problem. It can be a hard thing to sort of get a lot of insight into until you find where the bottlenecks are by stress testing.
Okay, Nishad, I'm going to pivot you. I want to hear a little bit about Serum and what is this Serum thing and where have you been contributing? I know you're excited about it. I know everyone in the companies that's involved is pretty excited. So I'd love to hear it from the engineering standpoint.
Yeah, Serum is a decentralized finance ecosystem. A lot of buzzwords there. The core of it is something like, we built like a centralized exchange FTX. And there are a bunch of things that centralized exchanges are great for. But like one class of things that they can't do very well is easily adopt upgrades that other people make in the space, sort of easily integrate them, develop a whole community that really builds on something together. And that's something that the decentralized sort of crypto world is well adopted to technologically. And to make that more concrete, something that you can't do in the centralized world is say, I'm going to plug the Binance ecosystem into the FTX one directly and seamlessly and without a ton of coordination and expect things to work out great. In the traditional engineering world, a lot of work goes into making an integration like that happen. There are a lot of reasons you might want it. Like for one example, one instance, like one big problem in crypto is that there isn't central clearing, that Bitcoins on one exchange are by definition not on another exchange. And so you can end up getting liquidated on one exchange because you don't have enough funding, you don't have enough funds there, when actually you had plenty of funds that were just on a different exchange. And if you could make both of these exchanges plug into each other and be aware of the fact that you actually sort of have funds on both, you could imagine a system in which you didn't have to get liquidated in that instance. And that would be a really valuable thing. That would actually solve a sort of huge space of concerns of crypto trading firms. In DeFi, stuff like this basically is possible because you can plug stuff into each other directly. There's this like really powerful concept of composability that exists in the DeFi world, where people can work on independent projects. And by virtue of just having a really tightly well-defined interface that exists sort of in code on the blockchain, you can sort of make things integrate together well with some foresight and without a lot of explicit coordination. Like, you could, Tristan, be working on like something like a messaging app. I could be working on something like a decentralized exchange. And if you want to integrate something like in-app payments, you can kind of just do that. We don't really have to talk about it. I mean, we totally could, but there doesn't have to be a month-long process where I feed you API docs and you say, oh, I'm running into this bug. And whenever I make an upgrade, there's like cause problems for you. Code is law, code is straightforward, it's public, you can see what's going on and you can just make it work. And that's super powerful because it means that the space, these are the raw horsepower of available development on a project like Serum is much larger than for FTX, where it's constrained to a few engineers by necessity. And that you don't run into all these coordination problems making it work. Like you can have a bunch of independent systems that are really individually powerful that compose together into something that's much greater than the sum of its parts. I think that sort of informs, like fundamentally, that's what's super exciting about something like Serum in a decentralized ecosystem. That only really addresses why DeFi is powerful. Why Serum in particular is powerful is, at least from my perspective, really tied to the sort of baseline engineering related to it. It exists on the Solana chain, which is the fastest and most performant chain available. And most importantly, it scales really, really well. The Ethereum network can take something like 15 transactions a second, like en masse, without using a bunch of tricks. And that can be a huge bottleneck. Like you can't imagine something like Visa or MasterCard, if you wanted to run them in a decentralized system, operating with only 15 transactions worldwide a second. Like you'd be hugely bottlenecked. And so for this space to really achieve its dreams and really make the use of all these great properties that the decentralized crypto world has, you want something that has significantly higher capacity. And Solana offers that. We're really excited about where this can go. It's a much longer timescale project. I think the sort of grand vision of it is really huge.
I totally agree. You hear that, listeners? We're always looking for builders, so come reach out whenever you want.
Oh yeah, there's a huge list of projects people can work on. And as I said, like in the case of Serum, you really can just work on it. And once it's up and running, you really can just integrate it and we can work on that stuff together. It's not like how, if you wanted to make a change to FTX and you didn't work here, I don't have great advice for you. For Serum, it's much more straightforward. So yeah, definitely encourage you guys who are interested to give it a shot.
So I have a personal question for you, Nishad. I know when you were 16, you ran 100 consecutive miles, and I'd love to know how you got into the correct headspace to do that.
Yeah, well, I sort of happened into this too. So I wasn't athletic at all. But before this, I was the kid that sort of always leaned on asthma as an excuse not to try. And then when I did try, I'd get like disappointed. There was like a negative feedback cycle there where I never decided to define myself in terms of athletics and never really achieved anything there and was never proud of it. I tried out cross country in high school. There too, I was like kind of bad, but it turned out that running was pretty fun. My mom at the same time was starting to run marathons and then ultra marathons. Ultras being anything sort of north of 26.2 miles, and had like a really, really great coach that turned into a family friend. I decided to give it a shot. And it turned out that like it kind of just worked, that this sort of fit where like my mental athletic strength was. You don't need to be fast to run long distances. That's sort of the most important part of this, is that you can be pretty slow. You can, if you want to, like there's nothing sort of against the rules of long distance running that says, actually you just walk, you don't really run. That's totally fine. Usually what people cared about, or at least like, the things that I cared about were covering long distances. And so, there's really no limit to how far you could go. Like it's hard to imagine that you're ever so bent out of shape that you can't take another step, which is something of a proof for how you can go extremely far. And a phrasing like that might be like discouraging, because it might just suggest that really to get something like 100 miles under your feet, you just have to slam sheer will against this like unmovable object and this like incredibly daunting task of completing 100 miles. But it's not quite like that. Like, difficulty is like a super multi-dimensional thing. And like, if you like look into what exactly it is that's going on in your head that makes running long distances hard, often each individual thing that's going on is addressable. And so I think like the process of addressing those and like sort of achieving more and getting longer and longer distances was really satisfying and really gratifying. And like one example of what I mean by difficulty being multidimensional is something like the thing that would really get me down and most make me feel like I need to stop when I'm 30 miles into something and I'm trying to get to 50. It wasn't that my legs really hurt or anything like that. It was that just I would feel defeated and hopeless emotionally and really tired, and like another 20 miles just seemed like so incredibly long. And like, why am I even doing this? When I'd identify this like negative thought pattern, invariably it was because I was low blood sugar. And just like in the moment, I could never believe that was true. In the moment, I was like, oh, this is not because I'm low blood sugar. These are just reasonable thoughts. Obviously 20 miles is an impossible amount to cover. Like, this sucks. But the moment I've like ate 5 Oreos or something, I would feel really differently. And 50 pounds and 10 years later, I still have a problem with my sort of reliance on Oreos. Another story. But I guess what I'm trying to say is the game for long distance running is definitely a mental one, at least the way that I approached it, not a physical one. It's silly to say there aren't physical components, but like the real advantage and edge I had was just in developing a lot of good mental techniques and like a good healthy attitude towards it so that I could remain encouraged and excited and feel like it was an adventure and treat problems as they came up instead of like getting super stressed out and demoralized at this like seemingly impossible task of covering 100 miles. Yeah, that's a thing or two about mental state and running, I guess.
Yeah, thank you. I appreciate you for sharing that. And then my last question for you, Nishad, is for the listeners, for people that may want to get into the cryptocurrency space, the blockchain space, as an engineer, maybe as other roles, what are some words of advice you could leave for them that have helped you on this journey?
Do it.
Just do
Crypto's
it.
still early, I'd like to think. The biggest decisions the biggest mistakes that we've made at sort of in our company are not doing things earlier for the most part. If you think you see an opportunity and you feel like you sort of have the means to sort of withstand failure, and you're excited about it, just go for it. I think Serum's a particularly good place to go for it because of the things I was talking about earlier. That the reasons that a project in Serum you don't have to think that hard about things like coordination and getting people to pick up your project and stuff like that. Like, yes, it matters. It turns out we're super eager to make it help, but more importantly, technologically, it's a simple thing relative to what it might be in a centralized world. There are way fewer steps to get up and running and to prove that you've got a really cool idea in the Serum world. I would probably advise doing something like that. You can totally get into something like crypto trading or into the centralized exchange world. Those are pretty hard. It's been a long time since FTX is basically the last successful exchange that was built. There's some information there, and crypto trading is quite hard. Had you joined in 2015 or 2017 or something, might be a different story. These days, my impression is that the competition is pretty steep. Definitely encourage you to do it, but I think it's sort of less reliably going to lead to success than building a project that is just kind of cool that you think you can do in the Serum world. So if you mostly feel like you're a dilettante and just have a cool couple ideas or are looking for ideas, I think Serum's a great place to start. And I think, for instance, you don't have to worry about failure as much because of that. Like, if your tolerance for failure is lower, which is reasonable for many people, Serum's more sort of forgiving. And also the ecosystem's huge and is developing, is nascent, but is developing. And I think that might make it a particularly exciting area to make new projects in.
Yeah, thank you. And you hear that, listeners? If anyone is interested, please shoot me a message on Twitter. I'll be happy to get back to you because I'm helping coordinate some of the teams and whatnot. And Nishad, to you, thank you so much for your time. I know you're a busy man, so I appreciate you coming on.
Yeah, of course. Thanks for having me.